Welcome to Off the Wall. My name is Trey. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have a ton to get into. We've got IFL Week 8. We'll recap some of those games that went down. Some of the teams that were near the bottom of the league finally got their first win of the season. Some of the teams at the top of the league showed a little bit of weakness. So we'll recap those games and dive into some of those specifics, as well as doing a preview of what's ahead in IFL Week 9 this upcoming weekend. We're also going to have an interview with linebacker Tre Harvey of the Tulsa Oilers of the IFL. We're going to talk about his journey through football, his introduction to the indoor game, and much, much more. So super excited for that. Then we're going to dive into AFL Week 2, talk about some of the highs, some of the lows, some of the nonsense on the field, some of the nonsense off the field. There's plenty of it, no shortage. But before we dive into any of that, please make sure you follow us on socials. We're on Instagram, Twitter/X, and TikTok at Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball. Off the Wall FB on each of those. Come by and say hi. We're getting in the mix on some topics with the community on Twitter X. We're starting to do some Twitter Spaces after some games, so join in on the fun there. Instagram, experimenting with different types of content and some more visual recaps of things and some things that catch my eye when I'm watching the game. So be sure to give us a follow on each of those. Try to mix it up with what we're posting. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music, please check out the YouTube. Give us a like, subscribe, all that stuff. If you've ever thought to yourself, man, I wish I could listen to Off the Wall on the go, well, you're in luck. We are in podcast form as well. So you can check us out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Give us that hopefully 5-star rating. If we deserve it, I think we are, but you do you. And that helps, drive us up charts or feeds the algorithm. I don't know. It does good things. So if you enjoy the show, please give us a rating on there. It'll help us continue to grow. So without further ado, IFL Week 8. The first game we're going to get into is the Jacksonville Sharks at the Tulsa Oilers, where Jacksonville went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and got their first win of the season, winning 47-44 on the black turf there. Starting with the Sharks, their quarterback, Fred Payton Jr., looked really, really good. The past couple of games were his first games playing indoor football, and you could tell he was pretty green, but the athleticism was there to make plays and to make things happen, and everything just seemed to be clicking for him in the offense to an extent. Things could have been better, yes, but this was by far their best game of the year with any quarterback at the helm. So Fred Payton Jr. has got to be the guy for Jacksonville moving forward. Even if some of the other quarterbacks come back and are healthy once again, you got to roll with Payton Jr. just because he gave a true dual threat element to the offense that's been lacking up to this point. Jacksonville, to start off the year, they kind of had some NAL, old arena, like feel to their offense where it was very ground and pound, and they ran some plays with a defensive lineman at wide receiver to act as like a fullback to block for the running back and quarterback, but it just wasn't working out. And you could tell that they started to make some adjustments to be more of that prototypical IFL indoor football offense, and it's starting to work out. So big shout out to Jacksonville for the adjustments they made, finally getting their first win of the season. Prior to this, they hadn't scored over 35 points in a single game. They popped off for 47 here and honestly could have gone for a little bit more. So Jacksonville, they're not totally out of it. They're sitting at 1-5 right now, but the Eastern Conference, if you look from top to bottom, there's a couple teams at the top that are gonna stay there, but all throughout it's up for grabs. Like, we're still early in the season, still got 10 games to go. So Jacksonville, if they can start to build off of what they did here, they could be in a position where they're vying for a playoff spot, and because they're by no means out of it just yet. So I was super impressed with what I was seeing, and yeah, Jacksonville got their first win of the season. On the other side, Tulsa is a very confusing team. They have a lot. They're either hot or cold, especially on offense. Like the past 4 weeks here, they've scored 56 points on offense, 32 points on offense, 72 points on offense, and then 44, which that 44 kind of has an asterisk because they scored with no time left to make it 44. So for 59 minutes and 58 seconds of that game, they were sitting, they had scored 38 points. So, and they just look like a shell of themselves, especially after the 72 bomb that they dropped last week. Jared Ware at running back, he looked pretty good. He had 14 carries for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. But the passing attack just needed to be better to keep them in this game and to ultimately pull out the win. And it just wasn't what it needed to be. Consistency week to week is going to be very important for the Oilers moving forward. And you need to avoid those hills and valleys of offensive production from the past couple of games. And if that means your ceiling is a little bit lower, but your floor is a lot higher, I think that's a trade you make every single time, especially with the defense that Tulsa has, where they're gonna keep you in some games, even if your offense isn't doing what they need to do on a game to game basis. So they're in a great position to contend for one of those playoff spots that we mentioned earlier, but they got to do themselves some favors first. The next game we're going to talk about is the Green Bay Blizzard at the Sioux Falls Storm. And this was another one where Sioux Falls was looking for their first win of the season, and they found it against their rival, the Green Bay Blizzard. Sioux Falls won this game 46-38. So starting with Sioux Falls, they're in an interesting spot because over the past few weeks, we've talked about their offense and efficiency wise, they kind of they have a high floor, but a very low ceiling. And in this game, they kind of got a spark of life when quarterback Lorenzo Brown Jr. came into the game. Now, if you're not familiar with Lorenzo Brown Jr., he was the quarterback for Sioux Falls for the past couple of years. And he's by far one of the most successful players in IFL history, let alone Sioux Falls history. You look at the record books for Sioux Falls, he's number one in rushing attempts, number one in rushing yards, passing attempts, passing yards. He's at the top just because he had sustained success for so long and won multiple championships with the Storm. So he retired at the end of last season when their head coach retired. And you would think that he would ride off into the sunset, but Arizona Rattlers gave him a call one game into the season because they desperately needed quarterback help. He came out of retirement after one whole game, played a few games with Arizona, got released by Arizona and came back and joined the Storm. And he got his first real playing time in this game. And he came in and had 3 rushing touchdowns on the day and kind of made things happen for the Storm offense and ultimately led them to their first victory of the season. So touched on it before about him having to be the guy moving forward just to if you're serious about contending this year. And I think you gotta go with it. Billy Hall statistically didn't do bad this game, but Lorenzo Brown Jr. just brings that extra X factor, and he gives the defense a little bit of pause when he's on the field, just because he has been so impactful as a rusher over the past however many years that he was in Sioux Falls. Efficiency has been an issue for the Storm, and I think Brown, if you give him an entire game at quarterback, I think you'll see them kind of exceed those ceilings that they've had over the past 6 weeks of the season to start off, and hopefully be able to break through that threshold and start putting some 50, possibly 60 points on the board at any given time. Because the Sioux Falls defense did pretty good. The special teams did well as well. So Sioux Falls as a whole, they have a pretty good team. They just couldn't get things going on offense, and Lorenzo Brown Jr. seems to be the answer to their offensive problems. So we'll see if they go with him full time. We'll see, because Billy Hall did get the start, but Lorenzo Brown Jr. did end up coming into the game, alternating drives for a little bit, but then he finished it. So I think Lorenzo Brown Jr.'s got to be the guy moving forward, but we'll see what Sioux Falls ends up doing. On the other side of the ball, the Green Bay Blizzard have their own offensive woes that they have to get figured out. And I think priority number one for them has to be production at wide receiver. Last season, they had Marquise Irvin, who was one of the best wide receivers in all of indoor football. He left in the offseason to go join the Nashville Cats of the AFL. So there is a production gap that is missing in the passing game. And each game, it seems like a different wide receiver somewhat rises to the occasion, has a big play here, will have 6, 7 catches here, but they don't really have a true wide receiver one right now. And I think they really need that to kind of get things a little bit more consistent in the passing game. And Green Bay's identity has been centered on running the ball and playing great defense. They played pretty good defense in this game, but they kind of got away from running the ball. They had a pass to run ratio of 2-1 this game, meaning they passed the ball twice as much as they ran it. And that's very abnormal to see out of this Green Bay team. I know I've joked about Green Bay being Big Ten football, running the ball, playing defense. It's true. That's who they are, especially in the scope of indoor football. That's their identity, and they kind of got away from that. So especially when you have players like Max Mailer and EJ Burgess at running back, you got to commit to running the ball because at no point were they out of this game until late in the game when Lorenzo Brown Jr. scored a touchdown with like a minute left. And even then, they weren't totally out of it. So I think focusing a little bit more on that balance that they've done pretty well up to this point in the season, getting closer to that 1-to-1 ratio, maybe even straying a little bit into favoring the rushing game a little bit more. If they can do that and not get away from their identity, I think they might win this game. So it's they just didn't look like themselves, and it was strange to watch. And um they're not an air raid passing team, but they tried to be that for a little bit. But big shout out to their kicker. Andrew Mevis had 3 40-yard field goals in the game. He also had a deuce on the day, and he was ultimately the reason why the Blizzard were even in this and had a chance. So in indoor football, a 40-yard field goal is nuts. 2 40-yard field goals is crazy. 3 40-yard field goals in a single game, that's straight up impressive. So he's probably going to be a contender for special teams player of the week. Will he win it? Probably not, because they did lose. There were some other performances that were pretty good in winning efforts, but big shout out to him. And he single-handedly kept them in the game. And if the offense can, again, regain their identity and go back to being a run-first approach, the defense and special teams is going to do what they do, and they'll be back in the win column without any issue. The next game we got is the Frisco Fighters at the San Antonio Gunslingers. Now, these two teams played last week, and San Antonio handed Frisco their first loss of the season. So this is a rematch. This time they were playing in San Antonio, and Frisco was looking to avenge that loss, and they did that. They won this game 62-57. So a super high-scoring game, 119 points total. And it was a great game. It was a very fun game. It was back and forth action the entire time. Early in the game, Frisco's quarterback, TJ Edwards, who is the reigning MVP of the IFL, he left the game with an injury after a 4th down attempt. Unclear on the extent of the injury. The commentator said that he was holding his wrist to his chest and was later in a sling. So that usually indicates a collarbone or shoulder type situation, but I'm no doctor, purely speculation. But as soon as that happened, there was a little bit of a feeling like, uh-oh, San Antonio could hop on this and take advantage. But their backup quarterback, Larry Harrington, stepped in, and he looked incredible. He has been playing a lot of wide receiver with TJ Edwards, the whole league MVP thing, at quarterback, just to get him reps, just to get him on the field. He's a great athlete. He runs hard when he has the ball. And he stepped in, and if you didn't know about TJ Edwards and Frisco heading into this game, you would have thought he was the starter all along. He went in there and he started making plays on the ground and through the air. He had 3 touchdowns passing, 3 touchdowns rushing for 6 total touchdowns, and he came in relief. And to compete with San Antonio, you have to have an offensive assault that can keep up with their offense. And they did that with Larry Harrington at the helm. So big shout out to him for stepping in and not missing a beat and ultimately leading his team to victory. But it's yet to be determined if TJ Edwards is going to miss extended time, if any time at all. IFL is not very good about sharing that information with us fans and with us people who are invested into it. But if he does miss any extended time, Larry Harrington is at their fingertips and is more than capable of leading the way until TJ Edwards can get back in the mix. So super impressive outing from Larry Harrington. And Lionel McConnell deserves a little bit of shine as well. He's like their Swiss Army knife. He plays a lot of defense, but he also steps in on offense at wide receiver, and he is an ace when it comes to special teams. He had a kick return for a touchdown in this game. San Antonio had a botched snap on an extra point that they tried to throw into the end zone just to salvage anything. He picked it off and ran it back the other way for 2 points of their own. So he flipped the momentum of the game in that moment, and Frisco was in the driver's seat from there on out. And he just makes impactful plays all up and down the field, pass breakups, interceptions. He catches touchdowns on offense. He is an all-round great player who he doesn't just play on both sides of the ball, or all three aspects of the game: offense, defense, special teams. He's impactful in all three, which is super impressive to see. So big shout out to Lionel McConnell. On the other side, San Antonio was in this game all the way up until the end. It was back and forth. They were trading blows with each other, and it looked like San Antonio would luck into potentially taking some shots into the end zone to take the lead in the dying moments of the game. I will say this game turned into a bit of a ref show towards the end, where they kind of lost control of what was going on, and some questionable enforcement of penalties by the refs on Frisco's end kind of opened the door to questionable opportunity for San Antonio at the end as well. So this had the potential to be a very, very good instant classic, certified banger, no matter, depending on what you want to call it. But the ref show at the end kind of derailed that. But San Antonio looked great on offense. Sam Castronova had another phenomenal game. I feel like I say that every single week. He totaled 8 touchdowns on the day, 5 passing, 3 rushing, and they spread the ball around very, very well on offense. 4 different players had 4 or more catches on the day, but they just got outplayed by Frisco's offense, plain and simple. And there's not much they could do. You can't be mad at putting up 57 on the offensive side of the ball. On defense, it's been the theme of the season for San Antonio. It looked like they were starting to get things figured out over the past couple of weeks. But they kind of showed signs of their old self this week, specifically giving up 60 points yet again. So they're gonna have to get that cleaned up and figured out, because the offense, they're clicking, they're fine, best offense in the league statistically and by the eye test. But the defense is really letting them down. And if they had a defense that was 25-30% better, they could possibly be sitting at 5-1, 6-0 right now. So defensively, San Antonio is still continuing to struggle, and that's something they got to get figured out. Next up, we've got the Quad City Steamwheelers at the Iowa Barnstormers, and again, another team that was 0-5 heading into the week got their first win of the season when Iowa topped Quad City 55-53 in Des Moines. Starting with Iowa, I said last week in the podcast episode of the preview, I said this game is going to be a sneaky contender for game of the week. It's going to be sneaky good, and it was. Iowa jumped out to a massive lead thanks to some turnovers by Quad City that got returned for touchdowns. Kicker Gabriel Rui was unbelievable. Multiple deuces. He was putting the ball exactly where he wanted it on kickoffs, and he was lights out. So he probably is going to be a contender for special teams player of the week. But Iowa's defense, they stepped up. They got 2 defensive touchdowns, one through a pick 6 by Jefferson Fritz, and another was a fumble return. I'm forgetting the name. My apologies on that. And it's a good thing that Iowa's defense stepped up the way that they did, because if you take away the points that Iowa's defense and Gabriel Rui scored, Iowa's offense only produces 32, low 30s, somewhere in that range, and that's not good enough. It just isn't. So Iowa's offense still has some work to do. Kyle King, again, only had less than 50% of his passes completed. So you want to see better efficiency out of the offense and at the quarterback position. They're definitely making strides in the right direction with Kyle King at quarterback, but they just have yet to really put together a game on offense where you're like, all right, there it is. Like, that's the offense we've been waiting for. We haven't gotten that. We haven't gotten that game from them yet, but a win is a win. They all count the same. So they finally got their first win in the old W column, and sitting at 1-5, just like Jacksonville. They're not out of it by any means, but unlike Jacksonville, offensively, they still have to get some things put together, and they have yet to play a really good game on offense just yet. So hopefully we'll see that going forward, and Iowa can be a little bit more competitive in the weeks ahead. On the other side for Quad City, they are such an interesting situation. Past couple of weeks, we thought we had the quarterback situation figured out with quarterback Judd Erickson having some really, really good games with a couple costly turnovers here and there. And in this game, he had a similar situation. He was putting up some good numbers, but again, the turnover bug bit him badly, and they turned to Mike Irwin. So they kind of have a quarterback 1A, a quarterback 1B situation going on in Quad City. And if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. And that's a situation that they're really struggling with, because if you're looking at it from there's 2 ways you can look at it, right? You could look at it from the perspective of Wow, they scored 53 points without having a true QB1. That's pretty good. But on the opposite side, we're entering week 9 next week, and we still don't have a QB1 for Quad City. And that's part of the reason why they haven't been winning some of these games that should have been very, very winnable for them. Mike Irwin came in the game towards the end once Iowa was up big, and he led a comeback attempt that would have been pretty sweet if a couple things bounced their way. But they were down by as much as 28 at one point, and they only lost the game by 2. So they came back, and it was a valiant effort. So going forward, we thought we knew the answer at quarterback for Quad City. We don't know what the heck is going on. So we'll just have to see next week if they go with Judd Erickson or Mike Irwin. But the rest of the Quad City team, the success ultimately depends on what they do at the quarterback position. And they got some good involvement on some of the guys on offense. Defense had some good plays to get them back in the game once things were what seemed out of reach. They made some plays to put it back within reach for them. But Quad City, man, we gotta get this quarterback situation figured out because this team is capable of making a run. They just need that big puzzle piece to fit in the right spot in order to do so. Next up, we had the game of the week in the Vegas Nighthawks going to the Bay Area Panthers, and both of these teams were undefeated. The last 2 undefeated teams in the IFL going head to head. You couldn't have scripted it better, and Vegas put a hurting on Bay Area. They won this game 62-43, and when I say it wasn't even that close, it was not even that close. At one point, Vegas had 62 throughout the entire game. Third time they've done that this season. And in the early in the fourth quarter, Bay Area only had 27. Offensively, they couldn't get a lot going versus the Vegas defense that was very opportunistic and taking advantage of some of the missing pieces that Bay Area had. But on offense, like I said, total beatdown by Vegas. Jerome Johnson at quarterback bounced back in a massive way after a rough Duke City game last week. He had 5 rushing touchdowns, and he had a couple passing touchdowns as well, and he was just making it look easy. There were a couple plays where it didn't look like he was running full speed, but he was just leaving people in the dust and scoring touchdowns. So it was great to see him bounce back from that rough game, but I think he's neck and neck right now with Sam Castronova in the MVP race for the IFL. And it's Vegas is far and away the best team in the league right now. Just because it came down to these two. That makes sense. They're both undefeated, right? But Vegas pulled away and they didn't let their foot off the gas. Like they stomped on the gas, and they put up 60 points yet again. Special teams, Jericho Flowers for Vegas. He had another kick return this week. That means he had one last week, so 2 in a row. 2 weeks in a row, he got kick return touchdowns, which is crazy. And it's interesting to think about. Vegas let their foot off the gas. Their backup quarterback came in the game once this game was in hand, once they had a 35, 40-point lead. Hypothetically, they keep their foot on the gas all the way through the fourth quarter. They could have put 80 on the board. Like that's how efficient and effective they were looking all throughout this game. So Vegas is scary. When things are clicking for Vegas, they're a very, very scary team, and they've got some interesting matchups over the next couple of weeks that I'm super excited for. But yeah, Jerome Johnson at quarterback, he's good. He's pretty good. On the other side, Bay Area, the wheels just kind of fell off, and they couldn't really get going. They lost a couple players due to suspension from the San Diego incident last week, where we had some players go into the stands to break up a fight, and they had to go back to Felix Harper at quarterback because Daquan Neal wasn't at full strength, even though we did see Daquan Neal come in a little bit later on in the game. But a lot of things went wrong for Bay Area, and it just wasn't their day. Defensively, they had no answer for Jerome Johnson at all. And offensively, they couldn't get much going until they were down by 35, 40 points. So they closed the gap to make it not look as bad. They only lost by 19. So on paper, you're like, oh, they got beat pretty good. No, it's whatever you're thinking. If you didn't watch this game, it was much worse than what you're thinking. They just got the brakes beat off of them. And through the first 5 games of the season, Bay Area was 5-0, but they also had some good fortune mixed in there. You could pick 2 or 3 individual plays to change through those 5 games, and they're not 5-0. They're sitting at 3-2, 2-3. So to be 5-1 right now, based on how some of those things turned out and how this game played out, it'll be interesting to see how Bay Area bounces back once they're back at full strength. Players returning from injury, players returning from suspension. By no means am I counting them out. They're still a very, very good team, a top tier team. They just today or this week was not their day. So they'll look to bounce back next week versus the Wranglers. That'll be a very, very good game as well. Every matchup in the West is a very good game and is worth watching. But yeah, Bay Area, they got to get some things figured out on offense. They have the weapons to be able to piece some things together. They have a great coaching staff that can get the best out of their players, but they got punched in the mouth this past weekend, and we'll see how they respond. Last game of the weekend took place on Sunday, where it was the Northern Arizona Wranglers going to San Diego to take on the San Diego Strike Force, and the Strike Force won this game 54-45. Starting with San Diego, they came out swinging. Last week they played Bay Area. They scored 0 points on offense in the first half, and that's not San Diego football. That's not something you would expect from a team with Nate Davis at quarterback. So after the game, San Diego coach said, we executed all the things that we talked about and we did in practice this week. And you could tell the offense was clicking. Nate Davis had 5 passing touchdowns. He had a couple big time runs for Nate Davis. You don't typically see him show off the wheels, but he flexed him and scored a rushing touchdown with a good old tush push, brotherly shove, whatever you want to call it, at the goal line right before halftime to capsize some of that momentum or capture some of that momentum. So it was good to see them snap back into form and really start to click on offense. And it was really impressive considering they didn't have 2 of their top receiving options in Arthur Jackson and Hoodie Rogers because they were suspended for their role in the Bay Area incident last week. So to see them not have their 2 top receiving options and still put on a clinic the way that they did on offense, it was super impressive to watch. Wide receiver Jordan Kress, he stepped up in a big way, made some really big plays, got a play on the Sports Center top 10, and caught 2 touchdown passes as well. So big day from the San Diego offense, and they bounced back from a couple backbreaking losses to Bay Area over the past couple of weeks. They've got a big time matchup on the horizon, which we'll get to in a minute. And one of the bigger stories of this game for those in the know of the IFL and the AFL was the addition of Connor Mangan at kicker for San Diego. Mangan was the kicker for the Philadelphia Soul during their recent issues and publicly shared his experiences and was able to get back on an IFL roster despite some of the things that happened with the Soul. Mangan famously brought back the drop kick from the dead last season, oddly enough, for the Wranglers, who San Diego played in this game. And it has started to spread a little bit to other teams in the league and in other leagues as a way to, get a little more bang for your buck on some point afters. He was able to successfully execute a handful of drop kicks. He hit a deuce, he had a field goal, and in a little bit of irony, he outscored the Philadelphia Soul as a collective team by himself this week. So it was good to see Mangan get on the field and to have a little bit of ironic revenge over his former team. And on the other side, if you're Northern Arizona, it stings to lose this game, but you have to be optimistic based on how your offense performed in this game. The past couple of weeks, they've kind of had some letdown games where if they were playing better teams, they probably lose. So it was a bit of a blessing to be 4-1 heading into this game. So sitting at 4-2 with the offense performing the way that it did in this game in particular, you got to be happy with how that feels as a Wranglers fan. Something we mentioned on last week's episode was they need to spread the ball around in the running game. They can't have Joshua Jones running the ball for over 50% of the team's carries. And I don't know if they're a subscriber or they watch the show or listen, but they did just that. They spread the ball around to a lot of different people on their offense. A bunch of people got people got rushing attempts and handoffs, and it showed. It was a massive improvement to the offense. And if they don't throw one interception in the second half, they were going back and forth with San Diego. That was really the only mistake of the game by either team. That was really the only mistake of the game by either team, and San Diego just took advantage of it. And if they were able to get a turnover on defense or get a stop late, they had a chance to claw back in, and they could have escaped with a win. But getting a little more efficient in the running game is a win in itself here. And you got to feel good with how your offense performed in this game in particular. Defense, that's a whole different conversation. But to be sitting at 4-2 with how the offense has performed over the past couple of weeks, they're another team kind of similar to Tulsa, but not as extreme, where when things are going great on offense, things are amazing. When things are not going great on offense, things are not amazing. So they'll look to continue that upward trajectory and hopefully get back to where they were early on in the season next week when they take on the defending champs. That was IFL Week 8, a very, very solid slate of games for the league. Very entertaining games. Fun little tidbit for you. All the overs went 6-0 this week. So of the betting lines that the league posts weekly, they post like 83.5, 109.5, 99.5. All of them scored more points than what the air quote experts thought. So lots of offense, lots of teams starting to turn the corner and figure things out. So very exciting to see them start to gel and start to figure things out on offense as we approach the halfway point of the season. So let's dive into some of the matchups that we can look forward to in week 9. Starting off the week on Friday, we've got the Quad City Steamwheelers at the Sioux Falls Storm. And what do we do with teams that are having quarterback issues? We put them right up against each other to open up the week. This is going to be an interesting one. I think Quad City definitely has the advantage heading into it. Probably looking at a Quad City line of -4.5, -3.5. Total over under, probably looking at around 88.5, 90, somewhere in that range. So this should be a pretty good game. It's not going to be the best game of the slate, on not even the best game of the day, but it's going to be a pretty good one. Now, if we're talking about game of the week, possibly game of the month, possibly game of the year candidate. Next up, we've got the San Diego Strike Force at the Vegas Nighthawks on Friday night as well, 9:05 p.m. Central Time. So 10 o'clock Eastern. It's going to be a late one, but oh man, it's going to be a good one. San Diego, I love San Diego's offense. All their games have been must watch so far. Even in the games that they didn't, do as well on offense, they've turned it into a very exciting game. And you get an exciting team like San Diego versus the most exciting player in the IFL in Jerome Johnson. This one is going to be a thriller. This might be the highest point total that we see all year. Probably going to be a point total around 109, 110 potentially. Now let me talk that down. Probably close to 103, 104, but it's probably going to be in the 100s. And I would imagine that Vegas is going to be favored here just because they are the top dog. They're undefeated. It's a home game for them. So probably looking at a line of like -3.5, -4.5. So this is going to be a very, very good game. And if you're going to watch one game all week, this has got to be the one. So brew the coffee, get a good little energy drink in around 8 p.m. so that you can last the entire game because it's going to be a good one. Next up on Saturday afternoon, we've got the Jacksonville Sharks at the Frisco Fighters. This game is probably going to be heavily favored towards Frisco, probably looking at a double-digit spread in favor of Frisco, probably like a -10, -12, somewhere in that range, just because Frisco is such a deep team. They're such a good team, and Jacksonville is only recently figuring things out and turning the corner. I think this total is probably going to be lower than people would think. So with Frisco putting up 62 last week and Jacksonville putting up 45 last week, people are probably going to think it's in the high 90s, but I think this game's probably going to be in the high 80s, low 90s, probably in that 89, 91 range, because Jacksonville has a pretty good defense. Frisco has a pretty good defense as well. And this being a home game for Frisco certainly works in their favor. So I think Frisco walks away with this one, but it'll be interesting to see what the total lines are, because Frisco hasn't been great against the spread in terms of these massive 16, 15, 14-point spreads that they've had early on in the season. So it'll be interesting to see where that final number falls. Next up, we've got the Tulsa Oilers at the Green Bay Blizzard on Saturday as well. This is going to be a good one. Both teams are rebounding off of losses last week to other teams that they probably should have beat. So this one in particular, with it being Green Bay, it's going to be low scoring in comparison to some of the Friscos, some of the San Antonios. Probably expect a point total in the mid 80s or so, probably like an 85, 86.5. I would imagine Green Bay is going to be favored in this one since it is a home game for them, and it is a closer to a toss up in terms of these teams on paper than you would think. Green Bay obviously has the advantage on defense. Tulsa has the advantage on offense, so it's a strength versus strength. But Tulsa's defense is pretty good as well. So this one has a sneaky game of the week appeal to it. So I would imagine Green Bay probably being favored by like 4.5, 5 in this game. So it's going to be a pretty good one. So 3:05 p.m. Central Time, 4:05 Eastern. Check this one out. Next up, we've got the Massachusetts Pirates going to the Iowa Barnstormers. This game's kicking off the night slate, 7:05 p.m. Central Time kickoff. Massachusetts had a bye last week, so they had a week to kind of reflect on their 19 penalty game that they had a few weeks back. So I would expect Massachusetts to come in heavily favored in this one, probably double digit, probably 12, 13 points, just because they dismantled Iowa earlier this year. But going back to last year, Iowa, they put up 80 on Massachusetts last year at one point. So I don't think that'll happen by any means this week. But Massachusetts is probably going to be favored. Massachusetts' defense is probably going to take advantage of the mistakes and of the lack of efficiency from Iowa's offense. So I would expect this total to probably be in the mid 80s as well, probably around 84, 85. And even then, I'd probably lean towards the under. I think it all depends on the health of quarterback Alejandro Benefield for Massachusetts and what their offensive weapon selection is going to look like for the Pirates, because they can have an opportunity to really bounce back in a big way. So we'll see what the lines end up looking like, but I would imagine that the Pirates are going to walk into Iowa and win this game pretty handily. Next up, we've got the San Antonio Gunslingers going to Duke City to take on the Duke City Gladiators. And this is probably one of the most interesting matchups of the season so far. Duke City is the last winless team, but they have a very, very good defense, and their offense has been letting them down all year. We've talked about this with San Antonio. They're the opposite. They have a very, very good offense, and their defense has been letting them down for the majority of the year. So we have a highly skilled offense going against a highly skilled defense. And then we have a letdown offense going up against a letdown defense. This is a much better matchup than you would think on paper. Joe Mancuso signed with the Duke City Gladiators a couple weeks back, had an opportunity to get in rhythm with the team during the bye week last week. So it's a confusing matchup in terms of figuring out what the line's going to be, but San Antonio is definitely going to be favored. I would imagine probably 9 point favorites in this game heading into Duke City. Total's probably going to be in the low 90s. We'll have to see if Joe Mancuso is the answer for Duke City. They're still looking for that quarterback answer. I believe he'll be their sixth different quarterback that's taken snaps for Duke City in their first 8 weeks of the season. So they need a quarterback to finish out the season, and Mancuso is a very good option for them. So hopefully this past week had a chance to get in rhythm with the rest of the team, but this will be a very, very interesting matchup. Next up, we've got the Bay Area Panthers taking on the Northern Arizona Wranglers. Both teams coming off of a defeat last week, so both teams will be looking to right the ship and get back on track. Bay Area's got to be the favorites heading into this. I know they just lost pretty handily to Vegas, but they're still Bay Area. I would imagine that they're going to be 5.5, 6 point favorites heading into Northern Arizona. This will be a good broadcast. Northern Arizona has a very, very good broadcast team, and they probably have one of the top 5 broadcasts in the entire league. So if broadcast matters to you, definitely check this one out. But I would imagine this total is probably going to be like 91, 92, 93, somewhere in that range, just because Northern Arizona's offense, they kind of turned the corner last week. Bay Area's offense can be explosive if they have the right pieces in place. So it's all going to depend on the health of Bay Area's offense and who they field. But this will be a pretty good game. I don't think it's going to be one of the better games of the weekend, but it's still going to be pretty good just because it's still Bay Area and it's still Northern Arizona. Then last but not least, we have the Arizona Rattlers going to take on the Tucson Sugar Skulls. It's the Guy Bowl, Kevin Guy, head coach and president of the Arizona Rattlers, his wife owns the Tucson Sugar Skulls. So it's a little house divided action this week. It'll be a pretty good game, assuming that Malik Mitchell is back at quarterback for Tucson. He's been out the past couple of games for Tucson with a hyperextended knee. So hopefully after the bye week last week, he'll be able to get back on the field and get back into form for Tucson, because Tucson needs him badly. Their offense just has not looked good without him out there. And he really gets things going for that offense. So if he's playing in the game, this has a chance for Tucson to sneak away with a victory here. But on the opposite side, Arizona, they just got their quarterback back recently with Dalton Snead coming back from injury. So their first game back from injury, the Rattlers put up 55 points. That's a pretty good tune-up game to get back into the flow and get back into the rhythm of things. So Arizona shouldn't have an issue scoring points. I would imagine this over-under is probably going to be high 90s, if not low 100s, just because Tucson doesn't have a great defense. So you have to stay tuned to see the health of Malik Mitchell and see if he plays, to really make a sound judgment call on either line, on the total, on the spread. No matter what it is, we'll have to wait and see. Luckily, it is the last game of the slate, so we can possibly make a game time decision if needed. But that should be a pretty good one. Not the best game of the day, not the best game of the slate, but both teams are very exciting when they're at full health. And that's week 9. It should be a pretty good one. We've got some very, very marquee matchups, and we've got some matchups that aren't necessarily marquee, so to speak, but very interesting in terms of strength on strength, weakness on weakness. So it should be a very, very good week of football in the IFL, just like most of the weeks are. So very excited to tune into some of these games. And some of the games are staggered pretty well. I think that's an underrated thing of this slate as well. We've got a couple games on Friday night. They're not starting at the same time. We've got some games on Saturday afternoon. So one starting at 1 Central, one starting at 3 Central. Got a handful of games starting at 7 and 8. So they spaced them out pretty well. Should be able to catch the majority of these games and watch it on replay on the IFL's YouTube channel. But again, it's going to be a very fun week of football, and I'm excited for it. Next up, we've got linebacker Tre Harvey of the Tulsa Oilers of the IFL. We'll talk about his journey through football, his transition from the outdoor game to the indoor game, and so much more. Here's Tre. All right, on with us today is linebacker for the Tulsa Oilers of the IFL. It is Tre Harvey, who's in his third full season of IFL. And the reason why I say full, we'll get to that in a little bit, but second season with the Tulsa Oilers. Tre, thank you so much for joining me today.
Man, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, just a couple Treys, talking ball, talking IFL, talking indoor. Not many of us out there, but we managed to get 2 of us in one Zoom room, right?
It's about to get dangerous.
Yeah. So I want to learn a little bit about your football journey and how you got involved with the IFL.
Yeah. So, actually, funny thing, I was turned off to the idea of playing indoor football at first. I told my agent when I was coming out, it was either NFL, CFL, or bust. And so I had spent about a whole year not playing football. So I graduated, my last football season in college was 2018. And so I spent all of 2019 not playing. I had gotten a call from the Philadelphia Eagles for rookie minicamp, but nothing happened with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of thought with that happening, I was kind of optimistic about something else popping off for CFL or the NFL, but nothing came to it. And so I just was working down in Texas, still training, staying in shape. And I got kind of frustrated because nothing was going on. And I just remember, praying. And I was like, man, God, like, why did you give me these abilities if I'm not going to use them? Right. 2 hours later, my agent calls me. He's like, hey, I know you said you didn't want to play indoor football, but I got a coach who's super interested in you. He even likes the idea that you might have to play a little bit of linebacker as well, but definitely wants to bring you at receiver. And so I was like, okay. And he was like, it's Corey Ross with Quad City Steamwheelers. It's in Illinois. And so I was like, man, let me think about it. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, what am I thinking about? I literally just got done praying that I wanted to play, and then 2 hours later I get a phone call. So that's kind of how I got introduced into the game, was that Coach Ross found me and wanted me to come on. And so I give a lot of credit to him for introducing me to this awesome game of indoor football.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. And the reason why I mentioned the third full season is because that first season was 2020, right? Where you basically played a game and then it all went away for a little bit. So
COVID season, man. We were 1-0. We were the
yeah,
2020 IFL champions.
undefeated. No, nobody beat you. What was your first exposure to indoor or arena football? Was it something you knew about as a kid, or was it something that as you came of age and was coming through the ranks became an option and you knew of it then?
Man, the first time, and it's funny when I look back because I didn't really think anything of it, but it was the Kiss back in the day with the AFL, and
Yeah.
so uh, I had a mutual friend who played quarterback for them, or a friend who was a friend to the dude who played quarterback for
Hmm.
them, and I just was like, "What? Like, what are they? What is he playing? Like, he's indoor." And so that was back in high school, and then didn't think anything of it, and I didn't have another exposure or introduction to it until training camp of 2020.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's funny to look back on some of the gimmicky stuff like that, where it's like, oh man, it's a little corny, a little cheesy, but
yeah, the flames on the
it
uniforms, and
yeah, it worked. Like it got exposure for the league. So in a way, you can't
yeah.
fault them. Like it definitely worked. But yeah, so I did some research on Tulsa and arena football, and they had like an AF2 team like in the early 2000s, which I didn't even realize until earlier today when I was doing some
I
digging.
guess so. Yeah, I guess I should take that back. I'm a born and raised Tulsian,
Uh-huh.
and that I knew about the Tulsa Talons. I knew
Okay,
they
there you
were
go.
actually my sister. She was a cheerleader in like fourth grade, and they had them come
Uh-huh.
out and do like a halftime show, and
Yep.
we went to a game there, and it's kind of I don't remember it very well. I
Yeah.
was super young, but um, yeah, I loved the Talons. I love that we had that. That's it. When we first came out. That's all anyone talked about. It was like, oh, I was a season ticket holder for the Talons. I'm a season
Uh-huh.
ticket for the Oilers now. And I was like,
That's
that's
great.
cool.
That's great. And growing up in Oklahoma and in Tulsa, how awesome is it to be able to play pro ball for your hometown team? Like that's not something that a lot of people can say.
Yeah, it is, man, it has been a blessing that I did not know. Like, it is its own animal, honestly.
Hmm.
My influence has grown like crazy. And I'm a very humble guy. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want that, but I will accept it from people who show love. And I
Hmm.
respect it so much. The guys on the team always give me a hard time. They call me the mayor because they're like, everybody knows who you are,
Right.
different stuff like that. And so it's been awesome though, just to be able to play in front of my family, my friends, my wife in the stands now.
Hmm.
It's super cool to have people that come out and support. I'm always looking in the stands in the, like in between plays and stuff,
Yeah.
and I will just catch somebody, and I'm like one game I saw my high school athletic director, and
That's funny.
there's all kinds of cool stuff, man. So
Yeah.
it's been a huge blessing to just represent the city of Tulsa and be a guy from here,
Yeah.
and just to be able to play and go out there with my guys and try to represent for the city even more. So
Right. Yeah. So when Tulsa was announced as an expansion team, what was that process like? Was it something where you reached out immediately and was like, "Hey, your boy's from Tulsa, let's make it happen," or what did that look like?
that's a funny story. I'm glad
Okay.
that you asked the question.
Okay.
So 2021 I played for Frisco.
Hmm.
And then I had originally re-signed with them. They wanted me to come back after the season was over. When we had our exit meetings, they said, "Hey, we want to bring you back for next year. Here's a contract." So I re-signed with them, and then they had the whole ownership group switch with Dallas Stars organization and all of that in
Hmm.
between there. But in between that time, I kind of felt that God was calling me to ministry, and so I joined ministry with Fellowship of Christian Athletes here in
Okay.
Tulsa. So um, I was hanging it up. I was like, I'm just gonna do ministry here in Tulsa. This is the kids that are here in Tulsa. This is where I was raised. This is where my heart is for them.
Hmm.
And so I was done. And then when I told my mom and dad that I was going to retire, my mom's question was, "Would you ever play again?" And I told her, "Mom, the only way that I'd play football again is if God brought a team to Tulsa, and that's probably not happening." And that was in November of 2021.
Uh-huh.
And then July, I think it was July of 2022, the Oilers organization, they announced that they were going to bring a team into the IFL. And so it was just like, they're bringing a football team here in the league that I was already playing in. My
Right.
mom was very quick to text me and say, "Oh, only if God brings a team, huh?" And I
Uh-huh.
was,
Yep.
Yeah. So, but with that, so when it came around, I was a little hesitant because I was like, man, is this a temptation? Is this a blessing?
Hmm.
So I was a little hesitant, and so Malik Duncan, one of my really good friends, we got
Yeah.
him being on Quad City. He was one of the guys that I connected with the most. As soon as I got into the league, he was my rover, and I was the linebacker for Quad City in that 2020 season. So,
Hmm.
and we played together in Bismarck. But he was like, man, you should just send your stuff to Coach Jones and just see what happens. And so I was like, all right, man, well, all right, just so he knows who I am in case I do decide I want to play. And so
Yeah.
I sent my film over, my player resume to Coach Jones, and I don't even think it was 5 minutes. And he called me and was like, what do we got to do to get a deal done? And I was like, oh crap, okay. So and I was just like, you know what? I feel like this is a blessing, and so I just went ahead and was like, let's go play some football again. And so I felt like I could
Yeah.
still play at a high level, and here we are, two seasons later.
Yeah. The second time you thought you were out, they reeled you back in.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I was reading up on your backstory a little bit and saw that you also went to college locally,
yes,
in Oklahoma. We hear a lot of coverage and a lot of stuff about larger D1 schools and colleges with like a bigger brand, for lack of a better term. What was your experience like at ECU, and what were some of the memorable moments from your college career?
man. ECU was awesome. You know, it's the area code is 580. So
Hmm.
anyone who's down there, we call it the Shady 580. And so, but it's awesome, man. It was a small town feel. Coming from Tulsa going to Ada was like it was not necessarily a culture shock. It was just different because there's not anything close. You know, in Tulsa, if you
Yeah.
live in the country and you're outside, you could drive to Tulsa pretty easy. But in Ada, you got to drive like an hour and a half to go to Oklahoma City.
Oof.
Um, so, but it was awesome, man. You know, that was good for me because that just meant all I had to focus on was school and ball, and so
Right.
that's all I focused on, and it was awesome. Honestly, I was kind of discouraged going D2 because I kind of did it to myself. If I would have gotten better test scores and took school more serious and
Hmm.
not been such a knucklehead, I would have gotten the D1 opportunity. But um, as it was very prevalent that as soon as I got to East Central, I found out it's not where you play, it's how you play.
Right.
And that's because my freshman year, there were I played offense in college. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Hmm.
And so I played tight end, and so I started as a true freshman, and on that freshman squad or on that offensive squad, five of them played in the NFL, and
Wow.
so there were NFL scouts every single day at practice. There were scouts at our practice more days than there wasn't, and so that was like
Wow.
crazy to me. Yeah, really crazy. Well, that happens when you have a 6'9", 330-pound left tackle.
That'll do
Uh,
it. Yeah, that'll do.
yeah. Uh, so yeah, it was awesome. Just I was like, oh, okay, I can still do this. I can still make my dream and go play professional football.
Yeah.
But I made some of my best friends in college on that team. Guys I
Hmm.
still talk to every single day. Guys that I get to share about life with, do life with, and it was a great experience. You know, I gave my life to Christ when I was in college down there because of our team chaplain Chris Snowden.
Hmm.
So it's from that aspect, it's had an everlasting impact on my life. But from the game of football, man, I've learned so much from some awesome coaches there with Coach Rashad Jackson. He coached at, I think he's at Arkansas State now, but one of the best offense coordinators I've ever played for. Just really helped me break down the game and taught me how to watch film. And that helps me now. And
Yeah.
being able to be on the defensive side, understanding concepts and what the offense are trying to do. So it was an awesome time. I learned a lot, grew a lot, and I'm super thankful for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the offensive bit because that leads directly into what I was going to talk about next. You're a bit of like a Swiss Army knife in terms of your utility and what you can do on the field. As you said, played tight end in college, transitioned to linebacker. You've lined up at running back. You've scored touchdowns. You've flexed the tight end skills. Recorded some catches on the offensive side of the ball. Tackling machine, blocking kicks, breaking up passes, return a missed field goal for a touchdown earlier. So, is there anything you can't do on a football field? Because honestly, that might be a shorter list than what I just listed.
I haven't had the opportunity to play quarterback, but I would love
Okay.
that. So
Okay.
right now, I wouldn't say that I can't do it. I just haven't had the opportunity to. But I
Yeah.
would love to. I would love to get the opportunity to play a little quarterback and sling the rock.
There you go. A little wildcat.
Yeah, come on.
Get you out there. Let's go.
We're running all hitches, but hey, we're
Yeah.
gonna we're gonna move the field.
Yeah. If it works, it works, right?
Absolutely.
And when you know what you bring to the table in terms of your utility and what you can do, what's the conversation look like with the coaching staff to get involved in those other areas of the game? Is it something where you have to do a little politicking on your end, or is it something where like, hey, Harvey, get in here. You're gonna take some snaps at running back. Like, what's that look like?
Yeah. So last season, they knew my resume, and every time that I've ever sent my film to anybody, I always send my college film just so they can see my versatility as a player.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, they already know what I can do. And sometimes, I'll give them a little nudge, just a little joke here and there, like, hey, if you want someone to be a lead blocker, or hey, if you
Uh-huh.
want someone to tote the rock, or just whatever, I'll just say something stupid in practice.
Yeah, just be like, hey,
Yeah,
I'm
I
I'm
know,
here.
I know a guy. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's they kind of already know, but I just am thankful that I've had coaches that are creative enough in the game. There's some coaches that they're just, this is what we're running and we're not changing it.
Right.
I've been thankful to play for some coaches who, they see the players they have and they're like, okay, how can I use them to give us the success that we want instead of just trying to
Yeah.
make us fit into their system.
Yeah.
And so it's just been super cool. I'm thankful that I have coaches that believe in me enough to play both sides of the ball and give me opportunities to have the ball in my hand to go make plays. But I really love blocking for. That's honestly like, I like being the lead blocker and just leading my running back or quarterback or whoever it is. Like, hey, I tell them like, hey, follow me. I'm taking you to the promised land. Let's go
Yeah, let's
score.
go.
So, yeah, I love being that
That,
guy.
that's awesome. Let's talk about this year's Tulsa team. Last year, the Oilers debuted in the IFL, like you mentioned. Expansion years are always tough, and the group you had some growing pains. But what's different about this year's team from last year?
I would say culture. Culture, and then obviously we have a totally different team. There's probably only like six of us that came back
Hmm.
from last year's team. Last year, we were the best worst team in the league. Honestly, like when you look at our 14 losses, it was by an average of 6.3 points is what we
Tough.
lost by.
Yeah.
And so just, you got to have guys who know how to finish and know how to play a full four quarters. It doesn't matter if you have the lead at halftime. A football game is not two quarters. It's not
Right.
30 minutes, it's 60 minutes. And so that's something that we really preached on coming into training camp. Coach Jones really took it upon himself to bring guys in who are going to be difference makers and playmakers. We got Noah Lyles on the line, and that dude's just a freak. And then bringing in guys like Kareem Golden at free safety, and Ramon Morris at corner, and just really helping us on that end of things. And then also having a consistent quarterback.
Right.
Last year we went through 4 or 5 different quarterbacks trying to find our guy, and Daniel Smith has come in and solidified himself as one of the top quarterbacks in the IFL. And so on the offensive side, I think that's helped us a lot. But culture wise, for sure, just the mindset of what guys want to accomplish. We can't just talk about it; we got to be about it. We talk about it all the time. I just talked about today in practice, actually, is that we got to focus on behaviors and not outcomes.
Hmm.
A lot of guys talk about they want to win championships, they want to go to the playoffs. Well, that's the outcomes of what happens in the season, but we got to focus on our behaviors because our
Yeah.
behaviors determine our outcomes. And so, just focus on little details, being better every single day, not being complacent. And so I think that's what's allowed us to have the success that we've had early on this season, and just to be different than last year. We had the guys who returned, very bad taste in our mouth from what happened, and
Naturally.
so
Yeah.
we don't want to do that again. The city of Tulsa doesn't deserve that, and so we're
Hmm.
trying to eliminate that.
Yeah. And you of all people have that extra motivation for the city of Tulsa too, right?
Man, yeah, it was a lot of these guys. They go home after the end of the season, and I stay here, and so
Hmm.
you run into fans that watch the games or people who, still being a new organization, you run into people who don't even know we have a football team still. They're like, I don't even
Yeah.
know that we had an IFL team. And then when you get that conversation gets started, like, oh, how'd you do last year? And then I just got to sit there and like, well, we went 2-14. Um, but yeah, man, I take a lot of pride. I hate losing.
Yeah.
And it's honestly, I get embarrassed. Like I'm just like I want to just put the brown bag over my head.
Uh-huh.
Anyone to know, I go to the grocery store and the old lady that's in the aisle, in my mind, she's like she knows, like you're a loser, and I'm like, oh, like she probably has no idea who I am, but in my
Yeah,
mind,
right.
everybody knows, and so, man, I take a lot of pride in it, and so that is a big factor into why I play the way that I play and how much passion and grit that I play with. No matter if it's on special teams, offense, defense, I want to win. I want to show the guy who's across from me that you can't beat me,
Hmm.
and and just I want to be successful. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, so I take a lot of pride.
So speaking on culture, something I've noticed with Tulsa in particular is that you guys have quite the fan base, and where a lot of teams seem to struggle with attendance weekly and drawing people in, you guys are doing a pretty good job of filling the arena, which is even more impressive considering how last year didn't go as well. What is about the organization that has resonated well with Tulsa?
Yeah, I think what the blueprint that, and I don't even necessarily know if this is a blueprint that the IFL is like looking at, if it's just kind of like this happened, but the last couple, besides the NAL teams that joined this year, the season before,
Hmm.
um, Frisco with the Dallas Stars, and then us with the Tulsa Oilers hockey. I think going to these organizations that have hockey teams, and saying, "Hey, you can extend the amount of time that you're in business and making money
Hmm.
if you get a football team. The arena is the same. You just take the glass walls off and you put turf
Yeah.
down instead of ice. You do the exact same thing. You're going to market the same, sell tickets the same, and so it's pretty it transfers over pretty easily. And so I think that one was can attribute to the success that we've had so far with our fans. A lot of people are dual season ticket holders for both hockey and
That's awesome.
football. But also, we're in the South, man. Some people can
Yep.
argue and say Oklahoma is Midwest, but we're in the South. Football is king here at every single school, and so when people know that we have a professional football team, they want to be there. And then also, the Oilers organization does a fantastic job on game days. Our environments are
Hmm.
awesome. Things that they bring out for the families and the kids and things like that. It's so much more than just a football game. It's so fun. And so I don't necessarily get to experience any of that. I just
Yeah.
hear all about it, at the end of the games, and I'm signing autographs. I tend to ask people if it was their first game or things like that.
Hmm.
And when they tell me it's their first game, they're like, "Oh, dude, yes, it was awesome. We're definitely coming back." Where I've gotten a lot of like, "Oh, we're buying season tickets." So I think just our organization has done a fantastic job of marketing to the city of Tulsa, but also the city of Tulsa loves football, and so OU, it's not in season right now for football, so
Hmm.
it is perfect for all the OU and OSU fans
Yeah.
to come and to still enjoy some football in the spring. So,
Yeah. They can get their fix, right?
oh yeah,
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the partnering with the organizations that already have a foundation because as we've seen with some other leagues right now, it's hard to build something from scratch in such a short time. So being able to not be an add-on, but be an extension of what you already have built in the community, that's huge.
yeah, and Vegas is doing the same thing with the Golden
Hmm.
Knights and Nighthawks. You know, they they still have a lot of room to grow, but
Hmm.
they have a great average attendance. They're getting thousands of people in there
Right.
in their games, and I think that contributes a lot to it. Is that some people might not know, but also demographics kind of the same for the fans. They
Hmm.
like being in that arena. They like it being loud. They like the fast-paced game.
Yeah.
So I think the fans transfer over pretty well.
Yeah. Um, the black turf. How do you feel about the black turf? Is it something where it's like a home field advantage? You feel like what were your first thoughts when it first went down?
Man, I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
I love the black turf. It's different. I think Vegas has black turf as well, and
Hmm.
so I thought it was cool. I was like, man, I've never seen a black turf field before. This is super awesome. The only downside is that when we wear all black and then you try to go back and watch film, it's
Yeah.
very difficult to see
Yeah.
yourself, especially when you're trying to get some clips to send it off to some scouts. sometimes that can be a little annoying, but you know,
Uh-huh.
you
Yeah,
can use technology to make it better. But I like it.
I'm there. I promise I'm there. I'm right there.
Yeah, yeah. I just
Yeah.
put a red circle. Just watch
Yeah.
the little numbers.
Yeah, when I'm watching the games, I got to turn the brightness up on my phone or on my computer just to make sure I can see everything. Just because it is a cool aesthetic and it is eye-catching for like people flipping through, the channels on YouTube and trying to hook people instantly. Because we got all sorts of colored fields in the IFL with Massachusetts, Sioux Falls, Vegas, and you guys. So it's a cool eye-catching thing and. Yeah, it's interesting to hear from the player's perspective. Like, I was always curious, like, do they hate it or do they really love it?
Yeah, no, I like it, but also I'll play football on anything. So
Right. Yeah.
I don't
Last question I got here for you. Being a linebacker, what is it like having one of the greatest linebackers in college football history, 11-year NFL vet as your head coach and Coach Jones?
yeah, man, it's a blessing, especially because in the IFL, you can't hire a lot of coaches. We're not
Yep.
just over here drowning in money, and so typically, there'll be okay, linebackers go with the DB coach or linebackers go with the D line coach, and so that was
Mhm.
kind of the story of my career early on, my first 2 years, um, and so getting a guy who is going to actually coach the linebackers and give us drills that actually are going to translate and help us get better. For a guy who's transferring over from offense
Mhm.
to linebacker, like I haven't played linebacker since high school, and so there's a lot of things that I had to work on. I was tackling too high, I was over pursuing, I was doing all kinds of different stuff, and so having a guy who's like, hey, this is what you need to do. Slow down, focus on
Mhm.
this. We're gonna work on this drill today. Do this, that, and the other. And then he's just also an open book. Anytime that I have a question or I'm trying to learn something different, or like, hey, why are we running this coverage against this? Like, what are you seeing? Or and he'll just, while we're watching film in meetings, he's just like, hey, look at this tendency right here. They're running the ball this way because this guy's doing this, or they're trying to get this kind of you know they're running these routes, and you can tell off their stems on their high motion of what they're trying to do. And
Right.
so it's stuff like that where I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't even recognize that. He's got so much football knowledge. He's been doing this longer than I've been alive. And
Mhm.
so to have a guy like that in your rooms, in your meeting rooms, and coaching you and leading you is awesome. Couldn't ask for better.
Yeah, it's unbelievable pedigree to have at the IFL level of the game, and it's not a surprise that Tulsa has one of the best defenses in the IFL. It's just not. Just literally look at the coaching staff.
Yeah, literally. And so it's a shell shock too when people are like shade tree, hey shade tree, like when we're out, and you're like shade
Mhm.
tree, like and then I'm like, oh, that was his nickname in college, and like so many people, especially older people, are like, dude, that dude was a freaking beast, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, like
Uh-huh.
he's just my head coach, but
Yeah, right. Yeah.
when you really think about it, like this dude was just in the College Football Hall of Fame, like first top 5 draft pick.
Yeah,
Like that
crazy.
blows my mind sometimes. Where I'm like, I'm literally hanging out with a top 5 draft pick.
Hmm.
That some people, like when I was in high school, that would have blew my mind.
Yeah,
Because people, like there's people are celebrities to a lot of people, especially in the football world. So
right. Yeah, and you're not just hanging out with them, you're getting pointers on how to
oh,
be better at
yeah,
your craft too. So it literally could not be a better situation for you. Hometown, college football Hall of Fame linebacker. You've got it. You've got it good right now.
I know. I'm trying to get. Hey, man, like rub some of that success off on me, man.
Uh-huh.
Help me get to the next level.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Trey, appreciate you joining the show today. Where can people follow along your journey from here?
Yeah, man, they can find me on Instagram and Facebook. It's just tharv88 on there. And so if they're interested, and I don't really post a whole lot, I'm not really a social
Mhm.
media guy, but if I post anything, that's where I post it. And you can keep up with me there, or you can follow Tulsa Oilers. They're always posting stuff as well, keeping you up to date on what's going on with the team and the players.
There you go. A team guy through and through. Plugging
Always.
plugging the
We,
Tulsa
not me,
socials.
man. We, not
That's
me.
right. That's
Yeah,
right. Well, thank you so much again for coming on the show, and best of luck the rest of the way this season.
absolutely, man. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Special thanks to Tre Harvey again for joining the show today. Tulsa's going to be a very fun team to watch down the stretch, and him and that defense are a major reason why. So definitely tune into a Tulsa Oilers game if you haven't already, especially if it's a home game on that black turf that we talked about. It is quite a sight. Next, we're going to dive into AFL Week 2 and recap some of the games that actually took place. And the reason why I say actually is because some of the games ended up getting switched around, canceled, but we'll dive into that after we talk about the good stuff. The first game on the slate was the Nashville Cats at the Albany Firebirds, and this was a very, very good game and a very entertaining one that unfortunately didn't get aired on NFL Network. It was scheduled to do so. That's why it was on Thursday night to fill that time slot. But unfortunately, it sounds like the league could not meet their financial responsibilities to fulfill that contract to get aired on NFL Network, which was a shame because this was a great game. And it's the second Albany Firebirds game in a row that would have been a great representation of the AFL to the masses if they had the opportunity. But unfortunately, it just didn't happen. Wide receiver Darius Prince for the Albany Firebirds had 5 receiving touchdowns. Several of them were very, very impressive catches. I think 1 or 2 of them were one-handed catches in the end zone. So there was some chatter before the season, like could Darius Prince potentially be an MVP candidate? And at wide receiver, that's not unheard of, but it's not super common either. And a game like this was a major indication that the hype is real. Darius Prince is a very, very good wide receiver, one of the best players in AFL history, and he flexed it and he showed it here. On the other side, Nashville was very opportunistic and they kept up with Albany for the majority of the game. They just got to clean some things up on offense and they'll be perfectly fine. Going into halftime, they were down 20-7, not an ideal spot to be in, but they ended up scoring a touchdown on offense with less than 15 seconds left. Then on the ensuing kickoff, ball bounced off the net, hit the ground. Nashville player was able to recover it and get in for a touchdown. So in less than 10 seconds, the score went from Nashville being down 20-7 to being up 21-20 heading into halftime. So that was a perfect example of the momentum of the game potentially being flipped in an instant because of the rebound nets. And it shows that teams are never really out of a game unless we talk about a team we'll talk about in a little bit, but teams are never really out of it because momentum can flip in an instant like that. These two teams were 2 of the top teams in all of the AFL. If we had to put a number, they're probably 2 of the top 5 teams. So the fact that we got a matchup between them on week 2 was very, very good for the league. And quarterback Ramon Atkins and wide receiver Marquise Irvin are going to be, when it's all said and done at the end of the year, one of the top quarterback and wide receiver combos. Irvin had a very, very good game with some great catches. Unfortunately, he just got a little overshadowed by Darius Prince's 5 touchdown catches. So Atkins and Irvin are going to be a very lethal combo for Nashville, and they'll be perfectly fine. In all honesty, these 2 teams are probably going to beat up on the rest of the league until they meet again in week 6. So circle week 6 on the calendar when these 2 teams meet again in Nashville this time. But these 2 teams were 2 of the top 5 teams in the entire league, and it was a very entertaining game. And so, yeah, these 2 teams are going to be contenders down the stretch. The next game we're going to talk about is the Iowa Rampage at the Southwest Kansas Storm. And this turned out to be the last game for the Iowa Rampage. Midweek, I think right after we released last week's episode, they made an announcement on social media that they were folding due to financial responsibilities that were agreed upon by the teams and the league. The league wasn't fulfilling their end. That's their story. We don't know everything just yet, but they ended up folding and the game was going to be canceled that they were originally slated to play. But Southwest Kansas swooped in and said, "Hey, we're going to play against Iowa and we're going to play the game this weekend." So in a weird, might be first time ever. I don't know. I'm just thinking about that off the top, but the team folded midweek, but then played the ensuing Saturday. It was a very interesting situation, but Southwest Kansas ended up winning this game 34-18, and they looked really good. I don't know if it's a situation where the air was out of the balloon for Iowa, so to speak, and they were just a little deflated out there. But Southwest Kansas has some ball players. They got some players that are very, very good. Wide receiver Daquan Bailey Brown, he made some incredible catches, scored multiple touchdowns, and was keeping his offense in rhythm and giving them some life all throughout the game. Defensive lineman number 21, Marquise Lawson Greenwood, he was disruptive all game long. He was putting pressure on the quarterback every single way possible, and he was a major reason why they were able to cause some turnovers, which were intercepted by DB number 4, Michael Lawson. He had an incredible game, had 2 interceptions and a forced fumble, giving him 3 interceptions on the year. This guy is a ball player, and he's one to look for to potentially take a step to the next level, just because you knew where he was just by his level of play anytime you were looking at the field. And unfortunately for Iowa, like I said, this was their last game. They folded. They're no longer listed on the AFL's website. They're no longer listed like on the schedule. So it's going to create some scheduling issues down the road. But Iowa is the first team to fold in the new AFL. And I say first because we probably have a couple more around the corner, if we're just being honest. So it's sad that they can only make it to 1.5, 2 games, but we'll see how things shake out, and hopefully some of the players on the Rampage are able to find spots on other teams, or are able to find another league to play in. Just because the players and coaches, they deserve better than how this whole situation shook out. The next thing we're going to talk about is the Philadelphia Soul at the Minnesota Myth, and Minnesota beat down on Philadelphia, winning 47-12, which ironically enough, Minnesota lost last week 47-12. This week they won 47-12. So interesting how that works out. But we didn't get a chance to watch this game. And the reason is there was no stream. Minnesota is supposed to be the site of the championship game of the AFL at the end of the year, and there was no stream. And the only way that we were able to get updates and check in on the game was we happened to find a Twitter user that was sitting front row that happened to be scrolling Twitter at the time that I put out a tweet that said, "Do we have any boots on the ground here?" Because there was no stream. The AFL and team socials were not doing a very good job of updating in real time. So before the game, we put out the bat signal, and our guy at LG Brandon B provided clips and updates all throughout the game. So big shout out to Brandon for providing those and giving the people what they wanted and what they needed, because the league certainly wasn't doing it on social, if we're just being honest. Philadelphia ended up having 7 turnover on downs, which was an absolute backbreaker. And combined with some other turnovers they had, they just didn't look good from the couple of highlights that we saw and the updates that we were getting throughout the game. And considering the start to the season that Philadelphia has had, it's not surprising. It's not surprising to see them struggling at the level that they are. So they're probably going to continue to struggle all season, at least until 4 or 5 weeks in. So Philly, they're in a tough spot. Minnesota, it's hard to determine if they're that good, because they lost by that same amount last week. So they won 47-12 this week. They lost 47-12 last week. Are they that good, or is Philadelphia that bad? We just don't know. So we'll have to see over the next couple of weeks as Minnesota plays some other teams like Albany, and that'll be a real test to see where they stand in the AFL landscape. Next up, we're going to talk about West Texas Desert Hawks at the Orlando Predators, and West Texas won this game 31-14. Very, very low scoring game for any level of arena football, especially the AFL. And this was probably one of the most painful games to watch, especially the first half. At the end of the first half, the score was 6-0. Arena football. Score was 6-0. Orlando's play calling was awful all game. It seemed like the play caller for Orlando forgot he had Drew Powell at quarterback, who has been one of the most dynamic running threats in all of indoor and arena football over the past 5 or 6 years. Didn't really utilize him in the running game until they were down double digits late in the game. On the other side, West Texas, their quarterback, Bain, could not complete a pass to save his life in the first quarter and in the first half. And once they got things going late in the first half, they kind of picked up some momentum going into the second half to end the game. But this was an ugly, ugly game. You can phrase it as it was a defensive struggle, but it was an offensive struggle, and it was offensive to watch just because it was not good. And I know that that's not the game that Orlando wanted to put out there. And West Texas, I'm sure they're happy with it because they only gave up 14, but I don't think it was because either defense was very good. I just think both offenses were not executing, and both offenses were struggling very, very badly. But on that note, West Texas, they do have a top 5 roster in the league. Their defense is so deep, and on offense, they have the players to be able to score points in bunches. They just couldn't do it this game, and they couldn't execute. So we'll see how things shake out. We'll see if they play again in the AFL. And the reason why I say that is because there's some documents going around on Twitter that I'm sure if you search West Texas Desert Hawks or anything on on Twitter, or this is a good time to check Off the Wall FB on Twitter to see some of the things I'm talking about here. But there was an injunction filed in the state of Georgia against West Texas from their former league, the NAL. And basically the judge is saying, hey, West Texas, you cannot play in the AFL until we get this resolved in or out of court. And West Texas said, basically, I'm summing it up, LOL, we're playing this weekend. And so the attorney for the NAL naturally came back and said, hey, I wouldn't do that if I were you. I think we should settle this. So it's going to be an interesting weekend to see how that unfolds. Will West Texas play? Will the litigation get wrapped up before the weekend? Will the judge on the case have to step in and do something? I don't know. We'll have to see. I'm no lawyer. I'm no attorney, but it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. But Orlando's got a ton of work to do on offense, which is shocking because they scored 45 points in the first half against Albany last week. This week they scored 0 in the first half. What happened? Like West Texas has a good defense, but they weren't that good. They're not that good to shut a team like Orlando out. So Orlando's got to get out of their own way, and they got to play. They got to play to their strengths, and they really got to get Drew Powell involved with the running game. I would love to see them put Drew Powell in the shotgun a lot more. They're putting him under center and trying to run some read options right on the line with the blocking fullback right next to him. You got to give him space. Line him up on a shotgun. If you have to have an up back blocking, certainly do so. Do some motion with the wide receiver, do some handoffs there. There's lots of things they can do that they just didn't against West Texas to really utilize the roster that they have. Next game we're going to talk about is the Billings Outlaws at the Washington Wolfpack. And Billings won this game 49-12. And Billings looks unbelievably good. They were dominant on both sides of the ball. And honestly, this game could have been much worse. The score was 49-12. This could have easily been in the 60s, potentially 70s, if Billings was really putting their foot on the gas and really going for the throat. Last week they scored 66. This week they scored 49. Could definitely scored 66. So Billings on offense and defense, they looked great for the second consecutive week. You kind of get into the conversation of, does Billings look this good because they are this freaking good? Or do they look this good because some of the competition they're facing is not ideal, not the best? So very similar to some of the conversations we've had about some other teams, but I think this Billing teams is for real. Great coaching staff on both sides of the ball. Play calling looked unbelievable. The execution was great on both sides of the ball. They have some studs on offense and defense. They're going to be a very tough team to beat, and they're probably going to beat up on some of the teams in their division all year, but we do get some marquee matchups later on in the year. Specifically, they'll face Albany, I think, in week 9. So that'll be a very fun game. Billings could potentially be 8-0, 7-1 heading into that game. So we'll see how they can continue to dominate from here. But I'm a massive believer in Billings. I think they are the best team in the league right now. But we'll see how the next couple of weeks go. And the last game we're going to talk about was the Georgia Force going to take on the Oregon Blackbears. And Oregon won this game 63-24. Now, I literally have no notes on this game. And the reason is there was no stream. There's no stats. I didn't see any highlights. The only thing that I saw that showed evidence that this game even took place was pictures on Twitter and social media from people who happened to be at the game and some highlights that players were posting of their own personal highlights on their social media pages. So it's another swing and a miss for the AFL and Oregon. They already have a handful of issues with their venue that they're taking some flack for. And the fact that they couldn't get a stream of this game, and there's no record of it on arenafootballusa.com. They have a week 2 recap article that details all the games that took place. This game is not mentioned. Why was that game not mentioned? It just seems something's off and something's not right. Yeah, if I had to guess how the game went, here we go. Oregon smacked Georgia. Those are my notes. That's all I got. I couldn't tell you much beyond that. But yeah, we got to have streams for all these games. Like, I don't understand why this is such a struggle. Now, if you listen to last week's episode, you'll notice that some of the matchups that I talked about were different from the preview, and some of the games that we talked about in the preview were not mentioned at all. A couple games that we mentioned in the preview last week that were supposed to be played this upcoming weekend were the Georgia Force at the Louisiana Voodoo, the Salina Liberty versus the Wichita Regulators, the Rapid City Marshals versus the Washington Wolfpack, and then the Billings Outlaws versus the Oregon Blackbears. So the first domino to fall was with a Billings Oregon match, where Billings was scheduled to go to Oregon. The owner of the Billings Outlaws said that, hey, the league said it's not safe to play in Oregon. We're pivoting over to Washington. Same bus ride. It's still going to be a long bus ride for Billings, so they didn't care. They're like, yeah, whatever. We'll play Washington. Cool, let's do it. So they pivoted their game to Washington. As a result, I left Oregon without an opponent. So what the league decided to do was to cancel the Georgia Force Louisiana Voodoo game and fly the Georgia Force all the way out to Oregon to get smoked 63-24. So it's just weird that the league told the owner for Billings that the venue was unsafe to play in, but they flew their league-owned team in the Georgia Force out to Oregon to play in a venue that they deemed unsafe. We have a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of things that we would like answers to, but unfortunately, the league, the commissioner, the CEO, all of them have been radio silent on all these things. And when you're that silent, the imagination runs wild for people that are really passionate and really care. And it's not like we live in a time in the 70s, 80s when players don't have a voice. Players literally have a social media account they can go to and say, hey, I didn't get paid this week. Hey, this messed up thing happened to me this week. They literally have a voice to say these things, and they are saying these things. And that's the only way we're finding some of these things out. So I would love to hear some answers from the AFL, from Lee Hutton, but unfortunately, we're just getting nothing, and it's frustrating from a fan perspective. It's frustrating as someone who covers the game. It just we shouldn't be struggling to get these types of answers from the league. And as a result, Rapid City, Washington was scrapped. So Rapid City didn't have a game. They had a bye this week. Louisiana had a bye this week. And Salina, Wichita, they had some crazy storms and tornadoes that came through their region of Kansas. So that's why they had to cancel that game, or I think postpone that game was the official terminology. But yeah, it's just a messy situation in the AFL right now. And as I alluded to earlier, probably will expect to hear more teams fold over the next couple of weeks. And it just goes back to what we've talked about before, how this league probably should have started with 8 teams, maybe 10 teams, and scaled up. Starting with 16 was very ambitious, especially when you consider that 4 or 5 of those teams were brand new teams that were starting from scratch as an expansion team. So think about the interview we just had with Tre Harvey, where he talked about some of the successful teams over the recent couple of years have started off as like spin-offs of existing hockey franchises where they already have the back-end logistics and everything taken care of. They just extended their coverage to have an indoor football league team. That needs to be the model that teams like or leagues like the AFL uses moving forward, because it's proven that they did not have the infrastructure and logistics to be able to pull this off with this many teams on a team by team level. There are the teams that are doing it well. Albany, Billings, Orlando, Nashville, they're executing at a high level. But there are some teams like Georgia, Louisiana, Oregon, Wichita to an extent, like they're really struggling and don't show that they belong, for lack of a better term. So it's a very, very frustrating and interesting situation to be in with the league, and it's interesting to see it unfold in real time. But yeah, we'll have to see how the league unfolds over these next couple of weeks, and hopefully the league can survive the year. I'm very optimistic that they can, but I'm very pessimistic that they'll do it with the remaining 15 teams they're currently on board. I just don't see a way that all 15 survive. And that's the show for the week. Not going to do an AFL preview for next week, just because we don't know if the games are going to get scrambled again. So we'll just recap the games as they happen moving forward. But big thank you to Tre Harvey again for joining the show and talking about his journey through football and talking about the Tulsa Oilers today. There's only 24 hours in a day. So the fact that you chose to spend one 2 of those with us at Off the Wall here. It means a lot. So big thank you for taking the time to listen. If you're listening, watching, if you're watching, give us a follow on all the socials at Off the Wall FB on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball. Give us a follow there. Trying to post some good content on each of those. Get in the mix with some folks on Twitter as well. So yeah, appreciate you joining the journey that we're taking into the IFL and into the AFL. And one of them's a little rockier than the other, but we'll see how things shake out. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care. I'll see you next week. Bye.